In the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, where the wind carries whispers of death and every shadow could hide an enemy, a conversation between a seasoned SEAL commander and a young female sniper would change everything. The commander, hardened by decades of warfare, looked through his binoculars at a distant ridge and shook his head. "That's impossible," he muttered, lowering his scope. "No one can make that shot. Not at that distance. Not in these conditions." The target was an enemy sniper who had been terrorizing coalition forces for weeks, picking off soldiers with deadly precision from his mountain perch. Intelligence suggested he was positioned at least 2,400 meters away, a distance so extreme that even the most advanced rifles would struggle with accuracy. The wind was unpredictable, the terrain treacherous, and the target barely visible even with high-powered optics. But, as the commander prepared to call for an airstrike, a quiet voice spoke up behind him. "Sir, request permission to take the shot." The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, a 28-year-old sniper whose small frame belied her extraordinary skill. She had been tracking this enemy sniper for days, studying his patterns, calculating wind speeds, and preparing for this exact moment. What happened next would become legend in military circles, a shot so precise, so impossible, that it would redefine what was thought possible in long-range warfare. This is the story of how one woman's determination, skill, and unwavering focus achieved what everyone said couldn't be done, saving countless lives and earning her a place in military history. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush when Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun pressed her eye to the scope of her Barrett M82A1 rifle. The .50 caliber weapon was her trusted companion, a precision instrument that had served her well through 3 deployments in Afghanistan. But today, as she studied the distant mountain ridge through the crystal-clear morning air, she knew she was facing her greatest challenge yet. For 3 weeks, an enemy sniper had been wreaking havoc on coalition forces in the Khyber province. The locals called him the Ghost of the Mountains because of his ability to strike without warning and vanish without a trace. Intelligence reports suggested he was a former Soviet-trained marksman, possibly Chechen or Uzbek, who had joined the Taliban after years of fighting in other conflicts. His skill was undeniable, 12 confirmed kills in 3 weeks, each shot fired from extreme range with deadly accuracy. Sarah had arrived at Forward Operating Base Chapman 5 days earlier as part of a specialized counter-sniper unit. Her reputation preceded her. She held the record for the longest confirmed kill by a female sniper in U.S. military history, a shot made at 1,847 meters during her previous deployment. But even that impressive feat paled in comparison to the challenge she now faced. Commander James Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the Navy SEALs, had briefed her team upon arrival. Rodriguez was a man carved from granite, with steel-gray eyes that had seen too much war and a voice that commanded instant respect. He had served in Iraq, Syria, and now Afghanistan, leading some of the most dangerous missions in modern warfare. When he spoke, everyone listened. "This guy isn't your average Taliban fighter," Rodriguez had explained, pointing to a topographical map spread across the briefing table. "He's professional, patient, and incredibly dangerous. He sets up in different positions each day, never staying in one place too long. The locals are terrified to even venture into his hunting grounds." The briefing room was sparse but functional, located in a reinforced concrete bunker designed to withstand mortar attacks. Maps covered every wall, marked with red pins indicating enemy positions, and blue pins showing friendly forces. The air was thick with tension and the smell of strong coffee that had been brewing for hours. Sarah studied the terrain carefully, noting elevation changes, wind patterns, and potential firing positions. The mountains in this region were particularly challenging for long-range shooting. The altitude affected bullet trajectory, while the unpredictable winds that whipped through the valleys could push even the most carefully aimed shot off target. "What's his preferred range?" Sarah asked, her finger tracing possible escape routes on the map. "Between 1,200 and 1,800 meters, Rodriguez replied. "He's got a modified Dragunov, possibly upgraded with modern optics. Smart enough to stay just beyond the effective range of our standard equipment." But Sarah wasn't carrying standard equipment. Her Barrett M82A1 was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters in the right hands. She had spent years learning its intricacies, understanding how environmental factors affected each shot, and developing an almost supernatural feel for wind and distance. The first few days at Chapman were spent gathering intelligence and studying the enemy's patterns. Sarah worked closely with the base's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marcus Williams, a young but sharp analyst who had been tracking the sniper's movements since the attacks began. "He's methodical," Williams explained, pointing to a timeline chart on his laptop screen. "Strikes every 2 to 3 days, always during morning hours when the light is optimal. Never from the same position twice, but there's a pattern to his movement." Sarah leaned closer, studying the data. Each red dot on the map represented a successful enemy attack, and she began to see what Williams meant. The positions formed a rough arc around the valley, each one carefully chosen to provide maximum visibility while offering multiple escape routes. "He's working his way clockwise around the valley," she observed. "Each position gives him a different angle of attack while keeping him at extreme range." Williams nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And if the pattern holds, his next position should be somewhere in this sector." He highlighted an area on the northeastern ridge, approximately 2,400 meters from the base. That night, Sarah lay on her bunk in the women's quarters, staring at the ceiling and visualizing the shot. At 2,400 meters, she would be pushing the absolute limits of her rifle's capability. The bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time wind, temperature, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth would affect its trajectory. She thought about her training at the Army Marksmanship Unit, where she had spent countless hours perfecting her technique. Her instructor, Master Sergeant David Thompson, had taught her that long-range shooting was as much about mental preparation as physical skill. "The rifle doesn't miss," Thompson had always said. "The shooter misses. Every shot begins in your mind long before your finger touches the trigger." Sarah had taken those words to heart, developing a meditation-like focus that allowed her to block out distractions and connect completely with her weapon. She could feel her heartbeat, control her breathing, and time her shots to occur in the natural pause between heartbeats. The next morning brought news that chilled everyone at the base. The enemy sniper had struck again, this time killing a medic who had been evacuating wounded soldiers from a roadside bomb attack. The shot had come from the exact area Williams had predicted, confirming their analysis, but also highlighting the deadly cost of their enemy's presence. Rodriguez called an emergency briefing, his face grim with determination. "We can't let this continue," he announced to the assembled team. "That medic had 3 kids back home. Every day we delay gives this bastard another chance to kill our people." The plan was simple but dangerous. A squad of Marines would establish an observation post on a ridge approximately 800 meters from the suspected sniper position. They would serve as spotters and provide security while Sarah attempted to engage the target from the base's highest watchtower. "The math doesn't work," Rodriguez said bluntly, looking directly at Sarah. "I've run the numbers a dozen times. At 2,400 meters, even with perfect conditions, the margin for error is too small. The target will be barely visible, the wind is unpredictable, and one small miscalculation means we've given away our position for nothing." Sarah understood his concerns. A failed shot would alert the enemy to their location and tactics, potentially making him even more difficult to track. But she also knew that conventional military thinking sometimes had to yield to exceptional circumstances. "Sir, I've been studying this target for days," she replied calmly. "I know his routine, his preferred positions, even the way he moves between shots. This might be our only chance to get a clear shot at him." Rodriguez studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or overconfidence. What he saw was quiet determination backed by absolute confidence in her abilities. Sarah Chun wasn't just another sniper. She was an artist with a rifle, someone who had pushed the boundaries of long-range shooting throughout her career. "The conditions have to be perfect," Rodriguez finally said. "Perfect weather, perfect visibility, perfect intelligence on his position. And if you miss, we abort and call in an airstrike." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just about making an impossible shot. It was about saving the lives of every soldier in the valley who remained in the enemy sniper's crosshairs. That evening, as Sarah cleaned and prepared her rifle, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up on a ranch in Montana, she had learned to shoot from her father, a former Marine who had served in Vietnam. He had taught her that shooting was about more than just pulling a trigger. It was about understanding your weapon, your environment, and yourself. A good shot is patient, he had always said while they hunted deer in the mountains near their home. A great shot knows when to wait and when to act. Tomorrow, Sarah would discover which kind of shot she truly was. The science of the impossible. The pre-dawn hours at Forward Operating Base Chapman were always the quietest, a deceptive calm before the daily routine of war resumed. Sarah Chin sat in the base's makeshift armory, surrounded by the tools of her trade, methodically preparing for what might be the most important shot of her career. The Barrett M82A1 lay disassembled before her, each component gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights as she conducted her final inspection. Sarah had always believed that a sniper's relationship with their rifle was almost spiritual. Every weapon had its own personality, its own quirks, and preferences that could only be learned through countless hours of practice. This particular Barrett had been with her for over a year, and she knew its tendencies better than most people knew their own families. Bullet drop at 2,400 meters will be approximately 32 feet, she murmured to herself, running calculations that had become second nature. Flight time of 2.7 seconds, assuming standard atmospheric pressure and temperature. But Afghanistan's high altitude and thin air would affect these calculations significantly. At 3,000 feet above sea level, bullets traveled faster and farther than at sea level, but they were also more susceptible to wind drift. Sarah had spent the previous evening with the base meteorologist, Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, studying weather patterns and atmospheric data. The good news is that morning winds are typically lighter and more predictable, Santos had explained, showing Sarah detailed weather charts. But at that altitude and distance, even a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind could push your shot off target by several feet. Sarah had nodded, absorbing every detail. Long-range shooting was as much science as art, requiring an understanding of physics, meteorology, and ballistics that went far beyond basic marksmanship training. She had spent years studying these subjects, earning a degree in mathematics during her off-duty hours, and constantly seeking to improve her theoretical understanding of her craft. The night before, she had also consulted with the base's senior intelligence analyst, Captain Robert Mitchell, who had provided the most recent reconnaissance data on the target area. Mitchell was a career intelligence officer with 15 years of experience analyzing enemy movements and patterns. Our drone surveillance has identified 3 possible positions where he might set up, Mitchell had explained, pointing to high-resolution satellite images spread across his desk. Each one offers excellent lines of sight to our patrol routes while providing multiple escape routes through the mountain passes. The images were remarkably detailed, showing every rock outcropping and vegetation patch on the distant ridge. Modern military surveillance technology could identify targets as small as a backpack from miles away, but it still required human intelligence and intuition to predict where an enemy sniper might choose to position himself. This location here, Mitchell continued, tapping a finger on the central position, offers the best combination of concealment and fields of fire. If I were planning this shot, that's where I'd set up. Sarah studied the terrain carefully, noting the angles and distances involved. The position Mitchell had identified was a natural rocky outcrop that would provide excellent concealment while offering clear shots at multiple targets throughout the valley. It was also at the extreme edge of her weapon's effective range. As dawn approached, Sarah made her way to the base's highest observation tower, a reinforced concrete structure that rose 3 stories above the main compound. The tower had been designed as a command and control center, equipped with advanced communication equipment and armored observation windows that could withstand small arms fire. Lieutenant Williams was already there, setting up spotting equipment that would help identify and track the target. His enthusiasm for the mission was evident, but Sarah could also see the nervousness in his movements. This would be his first time spotting for such an extreme range engagement. Drone surveillance confirms movement in Sector 7, Williams reported, adjusting the focus on his high-powered telescope. Someone's definitely up there, but we can't get a clear identification from this angle. Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting the bipod legs of her rifle until she achieved perfect stability. The shooting platform had been specially prepared for this mission, with sandbags positioned to provide additional support and reduce any vibration that might affect accuracy. Through her scope, the distant mountain ridge appeared as a maze of rocks and shadows. Even with 25x magnification, individual features were difficult to distinguish at such extreme range. She would have to rely heavily on Williams to identify and track the target once it appeared. Wind reading? Sarah asked, watching the flags and indicators positioned around the base. Variable between 3 and 7 miles per hour from the northeast, Williams replied, consulting his handheld weather station. Temperature is 68 degrees and rising slowly. Sarah made mental calculations, adjusting her scope's windage and elevation settings accordingly. At this range, every environmental factor had to be considered and compensated for. A temperature increase of just 10 degrees could affect bullet trajectory by several inches. Commander Rodriguez appeared at the top of the tower stairs, carrying a radio and wearing the grim expression that had become his trademark during this deployment. Behind him came Master Sergeant Thompson, the base's senior sniper instructor, who had volunteered to observe the attempt. Last chance to call this off, Rodriguez said quietly, studying the target area through his own binoculars. Reconnaissance shows at least 12 enemy fighters in the general area. If you miss and give away our position, they'll disappear into those mountains, and we'll never find them. Sarah understood the implications. This wasn't just about making one difficult shot. It was about eliminating a threat that had been terrorizing coalition forces for weeks. Success could save dozens of lives and restore confidence among the troops. Failure might allow the enemy sniper to continue his deadly campaign indefinitely. "I'm ready, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady and confident. Years of training and preparation had led to this moment, and she felt surprisingly calm despite the enormous pressure. Thompson moved to position himself where he could observe Sarah's technique without interfering with her shot. As her former instructor, he knew her capabilities better than anyone, but even he had never seen her attempt a shot at this extreme range under combat conditions. "Remember your breathing," Thompson said quietly. "At this distance, even the slight movement from breathing can throw off your aim. Time your shot for the natural pause between breaths." Sarah nodded, settling deeper into her shooting position. Through her scope, she could see movement on the distant ridge, but it was still too indistinct to identify as human. She would have to be patient, waiting for the target to reveal itself clearly enough to ensure a successful engagement. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part of any sniper mission. Unlike the dynamic action of infantry combat, sniping required the ability to remain motionless for hours, maintaining absolute focus while ignoring discomfort, fatigue, and the natural human tendency to fidget or adjust position. Sarah had learned this patience during her childhood hunting trips with her father in the mountains of Montana. They would sometimes wait for hours in freezing temperatures, watching for deer to appear in distant meadows. Those experiences had taught her that successful hunting, whether for animals or enemy combatants, required the ability to become one with your environment. "Movement in Sector 7 Alpha," Williams reported suddenly, his voice tight with excitement. "I can see someone moving between the rocks, approximately 2,380 meters from our position." Sarah shifted her scope slightly, searching for the target Williams had spotted. Through the powerful optic, she could make out a dark shape moving among the rocky outcroppings, but it was still too distant and unclear to engage with confidence. "I need a clearer identification," she said calmly. "Can you track his movement and predict where he'll stop?" Williams studied the terrain through his telescope, noting the natural positions where a sniper might choose to set up. "There's a cluster of large rocks about 50 meters northeast of his current position. Good concealment, clear fields of fire toward our patrol routes. If I were setting up a shooting position, that's where I'd go." Sarah shifted her aim to the area Williams had described, adjusting her scope settings to account for the slightly different range and angle. Through the crosshairs, She could see the rocky position clearly. It would indeed provide an ideal platform for a skilled marksman. Range to target area is 2,410 meters, Williams confirmed after consulting his laser rangefinder. Wind appears steady at 5 miles per hour from the northeast. The numbers were daunting. At that range, Sarah's bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time it would drop more than 30 feet and be pushed several inches off course by even a light wind. The target itself would appear smaller than a pinhead through her scope, requiring precision that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limit. But Sarah had trained for exactly this scenario. During her time at the Army Marksmanship Unit, she had practiced shots at extreme ranges under various weather conditions, learning to account for every variable that could affect bullet trajectory. She had also studied the techniques of legendary military snipers, from Carlos Hathcock in Vietnam to Chris Kyle in Iraq, learning from their experiences and adapting their methods to her own style. The key to extreme long-range shooting wasn't just technical knowledge. It was the ability to remain calm under pressure and trust in your training when everything seemed impossible. Sarah had developed this mental discipline through years of meditation and visualization exercises, learning to enter a state of focused concentration that allowed her to block out distractions and connect completely with her target. As she settled deeper into her shooting position, Sarah felt that familiar sense of calm descending over her. The noise and activity of the base faded away, leaving only her rifle, and the distant target. This was the moment she had trained for her entire career, the ultimate test of her skills as a precision marksman. Target in sight, Williams whispered urgently. He's moving into the predicted position now. Through her scope, Sarah could finally see him clearly, a figure in dark clothing carefully positioning himself among the rocks, carrying what appeared to be a long rifle. Even at this extreme distance, his movements showed the careful deliberation of a trained sniper preparing for a shot. Confirmed target identification, Sarah replied quietly. Request permission to engage. Rodriguez studied the distant figure through his binoculars, noting the weapon and tactical positioning that clearly identified the man as the enemy sniper they had been hunting. After weeks of terror and casualties, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. You have permission to engage, Rodriguez said solemnly. Take the shot. The moment of truth time seemed to slow as Sarah Chun settled into her final shooting position, every muscle in her body relaxed yet perfectly controlled. The Barrett M82A1 felt like an extension of herself, its weight familiar and comforting after thousands of hours of training. Through the scope, the distant figure of the enemy sniper appeared as little more than a dark silhouette against the rocky mountainside. But Sarah could see enough to know this was her target. The silence on the observation tower was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the occasional crackle of radio communications from other parts of the base. Commander Rodriguez stood motionless behind his binoculars, while Lieutenant Williams tracked the target through his spotting scope. Master Sergeant Thompson watched Sarah's technique with the critical eye of an instructor, noting every detail of her preparation. Wind reading? Sarah asked quietly, her voice steady despite the enormous pressure of the moment. 4 to 6 miles per hour, variable direction, Williams responded, consulting his instruments. Mostly from the northeast, but I'm seeing some thermal updrafts from the valley that might affect trajectory. Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope, accounting for the wind and the complex ballistics involved in such an extreme range shot. At 2,410 meters, her .50 caliber bullet would be traveling for nearly 3 seconds, during which time it would arc high into the sky before beginning its descent toward the target. Environmental factors that would barely affect a shot at normal ranges became critical variables at this distance. The enemy sniper was now clearly visible in his chosen position, a natural rocky outcropping that provided excellent concealment while offering multiple firing lanes toward the valley below. Through her scope, Sarah could see him adjusting his own weapon, preparing for what would likely be another deadly attack on coalition forces. He's settling in for a shot, Williams observed, his voice tense with anticipation. Looks like he's targeting the main supply route where our convoy is scheduled to pass in 20 minutes. The urgency of the situation added another layer of pressure to an already impossible shot. Sarah knew that if she failed to eliminate this threat, the enemy sniper would soon claim more victims from his mountain perch. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but she had trained for exactly this scenario throughout her military career. Sarah's breathing became deep and rhythmic, a meditation technique she had learned during her advanced sniper training. Each breath helped her achieve a deeper state of focus, blocking out external distractions and connecting her completely with the target. This mental preparation was just as important as the technical aspects of long-range shooting. Through her scope, she could see the target more clearly now. The enemy sniper was a professional, his movements deliberate and careful as he prepared his weapon. Even at this distance, Sarah could appreciate his skill and patience, qualities that made him such a dangerous adversary, but also made him predictable to someone who understood the sniper's mindset. Range confirmed at 2,410 meters, Williams reported after another reading with his laser equipment. Target appears stationary and focused on his own shooting preparation. Sarah made her final scope adjustments, setting the elevation for the extreme range and accounting for the wind conditions that Williams had reported. The mathematics of ballistics became intuitive after years of practice, but this shot was pushing the absolute limits of what her rifle and ammunition could achieve. The Barrett M82A1 was chambered for .50 BMG ammunition, massive rounds originally designed for anti-material purposes, but incredibly effective for long-range precision shooting. Each cartridge contained enough powder to propel the heavy bullet at velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. But even that tremendous power would be severely tested by the distance involved. 30 seconds to convoy arrival at the danger zone, Rodriguez announced quietly, monitoring radio traffic from the supply unit. The timing was critical. If Sarah was going to take this shot, it had to be now, before the enemy sniper could engage the vulnerable vehicles below. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger of her rifle, feeling the familiar smooth surface that she had practiced with thousands of times. The trigger pull on the Barrett was crisp and clean, requiring exactly 4.5 pounds of pressure to fire. At this range, even the slightest movement during trigger activation could send the bullet wide of its target. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper's movements, looking for the perfect moment to engage. He was now focused entirely on his own target acquisition, presenting a stable silhouette against the rocky background. This was as good an opportunity as she was likely to get. Sarah's breathing slowed to a barely perceptible rhythm, her heartbeat steady and controlled through years of training and mental preparation. She had learned to time her shots to occur during the natural pause between heartbeats, when her body was completely still and her aim was most stable. "Wind appears to be steadying," Williams whispered, monitoring his instruments. 5 miles per hour from the northeast, consistent direction. The moment had arrived. Sarah made one final adjustment to her scope, accounting for the wind reading and double-checking her range estimation. Through the crosshairs, the enemy sniper appeared as a dark figure approximately the size of a pinhead, requiring precision that seemed almost superhuman. But Sarah had achieved shots like this before, though never under such extreme conditions or with so much at stake. During her training at the Army Marksmanship Unit, she had learned that exceptional marksmanship was 10% technique and 90% mental discipline. The rifle was merely a tool. Success depended entirely on the shooter's ability to remain calm and focused under pressure. As she prepared to fire, Sarah thought briefly about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up on a Montana ranch, she had learned to shoot from her father, who had served as a Marine sniper in Vietnam. He had taught her that shooting was about more than just hitting targets. It was about understanding your weapon, your environment, and yourself. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't their rifle, he had always said. It's their mind. Everything else is just equipment. Those words echoed in Sarah's thoughts as she began her final trigger squeeze. The pressure increased gradually, smoothly, with no sudden movements that might disturb her aim. Years of practice had made this motion as natural as breathing, but she had never attempted it under such challenging circumstances. The seconds seemed to stretch into hours as Sarah held her aim steady, waiting for the perfect moment when wind, target position, and her own physical condition aligned for the optimal shot. This was the essence of long-range sniping, the ability to recognize and capitalize on the brief moments when success became possible. Convoy approaching danger zone, Rodriguez announced quietly, his voice carrying the urgency of the situation. Take the shot when ready. Sarah's world narrowed to the small circle visible through her scope. The enemy sniper had settled into his final position, his weapon trained on the valley below where coalition vehicles would soon appear. She could see him adjusting his scope, preparing to fire on unsuspecting soldiers who had no idea death was watching them from the mountainside. This was the moment Sarah had trained for throughout her military career. All the hours on practice ranges, all the study of ballistics and meteorology, all the mental preparation and physical conditioning had led to this single shot. The lives of the convoy personnel depended on her ability to achieve what many considered impossible. The trigger reached its breaking point, the rifle's firing mechanism activated by the steady pressure Sarah had applied. In that instant, the massive .50 caliber cartridge ignited, propelling its 750-grain bullet from the barrel at tremendous velocity. The recoil was substantial even for someone of Sarah's experience, but she managed it expertly, maintaining her position to observe the shot's impact. The muzzle blast from the Barrett was enormous, a thunderous roar that echoed across the valley and announced to everyone within miles that a large-caliber rifle had been fired. The distinctive sound would alert the enemy to their location, but if Sarah's shot was successful, that would no longer matter. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet's trajectory, knowing it would take nearly 3 seconds to cover the distance to the target. This was always the longest part of any extreme-range shot, the waiting period when the bullet was in flight, and success or failure hung in the balance. Williams tracked the target through his spotting scope, ready to call out the shot's impact, and help Sarah adjust for a follow-up if necessary. Rodriguez maintained his observation of the general area, watching for other enemy movement that might threaten their position. Thompson studied Sarah's technique, noting how she managed the recoil and maintained her shooting position. The bullet arced high above the valley, reaching the peak of its trajectory before beginning its descent toward the distant mountainside. Environmental factors that had been calculated and compensated for now became reality, with wind drift and gravitational drop affecting the projectile's path exactly as Sarah had predicted. At the target location, the enemy sniper continued his preparation, unaware that death was approaching at nearly 3,000 feet per second. His focus remained on the valley below, where the convoy vehicles were now entering his engagement zone. In seconds, he would begin his own deadly work unless Sarah's shot found its mark. The bullet completed its 3-second flight, covering the 2,410 meters between shooter and target with devastating precision. Sarah's calculations had been perfect, her technique flawless, and her mental preparation complete. The impossible shot had become reality. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the enemy sniper suddenly collapsed, struck by her bullet with lethal force. The impact was immediate and final, ending weeks of terror and saving the lives of countless coalition personnel who would have fallen victim to his deadly skills. Target down, Williams reported, his voice filled with amazement and relief. Confirmed hit at 2,410 meters. The observation tower erupted in quiet celebration, with Rodriguez and Thompson offering congratulations on what they had just witnessed. But, for Sarah, the moment felt strangely peaceful. She had achieved something that most considered impossible, but, in her mind, it was simply the natural result of proper preparation and execution. The convoy passed safely through the valley below, unaware that they had been in mortal danger just moments before. The enemy sniper's weapon lay silent on the mountainside, its threat permanently eliminated by a single, perfectly placed shot from nearly a mile and a half away. As Sarah began to secure her rifle, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had pushed the boundaries of what was possible in long-range marksmanship, achieving a shot that would become legendary in military circles. But, more importantly, she had saved lives and proven that determination and skill could overcome seemingly impossible odds. #Aftermath of the impossible. The silence that followed Sarah Chin's shot was more profound than any celebration could have been. On the observation tower of Forward Operating Base Chapman, seasoned military professionals stood in stunned amazement at what they had just witnessed. The enemy sniper who had terrorized coalition forces for weeks lay motionless on a distant mountainside, eliminated by a single bullet fired from an impossible distance. Commander Rodriguez was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "In 20 years of military service, I've never seen anything like that," he said, lowering his binoculars slowly. "That shot will be talked about for decades." Through her scope, Sarah maintained observation of the target area, following standard sniper protocol to confirm the kill and watch for additional threats. The enemy sniper's body was clearly visible among the rocks, motionless in a way that left no doubt about the effectiveness of her shot. His rifle lay beside him, no longer a threat to anyone. Master Sergeant Thompson approached Sarah's position, shaking his head in amazement. As her former instructor, he understood better than anyone the technical difficulty of what she had just accomplished. "I've been teaching marksmanship for 15 years, he said quietly, "and I would have said that shot was impossible. The math just doesn't support success at that range under these conditions." Lieutenant Williams was frantically recording data in his spotting log, documenting every detail of the engagement for the official report. Wind speeds, temperature, humidity, range, and ammunition type. All the technical information that would help military analysts understand how such an extraordinary shot had been achieved. Range, 2,410 meters. Wind, 5 miles per hour from northeast. Temperature, 72 degrees. Humidity, 35%, Williams recited as he wrote. Single-shot engagement, target eliminated. This is going to rewrite the manual on long-range engagement capabilities. But, even as the others celebrated, Sarah felt the weight of what she had done settling over her. Taking a human life, even an enemy combatant, was never easy for her. She had been trained to compartmentalize these emotions, to focus on the tactical necessity rather than the personal cost. But the reality of combat always carried an emotional burden. Rodriguez seemed to sense her thoughts. "You saved a lot of lives today," he said firmly. "That convoy would have driven right into his kill zone. Those Marines have families back home, and they'll get to see them again because of your skill." The practical implications of Sarah's shot became clear almost immediately. Radio traffic from the convoy confirmed that they had passed safely through the danger area, completely unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Intelligence reports from other units in the region indicated that enemy radio chatter had gone silent, suggesting that news of their sniper's death was spreading through Taliban networks. Within an hour, a helicopter was dispatched to the target location to confirm the kill and recover any intelligence that might be found. The flight crew reported finding the body of a middle-aged man armed with a modified Dragunov rifle equipped with modern optics. Documents recovered from the scene confirmed that he was indeed a foreign fighter with extensive combat experience. Intelligence suggests he was responsible for at least 12 confirmed kills in this sector, Rodriguez explained to Sarah as they reviewed the preliminary report. "Your shot didn't just eliminate one threat. It probably prevented dozens of future casualties." The news of Sarah's achievement spread rapidly through the military chain of command. By evening, calls were coming in from senior officers throughout the theater of operations, requesting details about the engagement. The shot represented a new milestone in long-range marksmanship, pushing